In the shadowed embrace of the mighty Hindu Kush Mountains, nestled deep within the breathtaking beauty of Pakistan's Swat Valley, there lived a girl who would become the voice of millions. The valley, rich with green meadows, cascading rivers, and silent, snow-draped peaks, seemed like a haven untouched by the world's chaos. But behind that natural serenity, something darker was brewing, something that would test the courage of a child, a family, and a nation. And in the middle of that silent storm stood Malala, a little girl with a school bag, a pen, and an unshakable fire in her heart. Malala Yousafzai was not born into power. She was born into purpose. From the very beginning, she saw the world not just as it was, but as it should be. Her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was her first teacher, not only in the classroom but in life, a poet, an educator, and an unrelenting believer in the right to speak. He raised his daughter not as a decoration of the home, but as a future light of the world. In a land where many girls were silenced before they could dream, Malala was taught to dream loudly. Their home was small, but their ideas were immense. At the dinner table, conversations weren't about limitations, they were about change. Her father ran a school, and she grew up watching children come through its doors, hungry not for food but for knowledge. She saw what learning could do. It sharpened minds, it opened hearts, it built bridges, and it made you unafraid. But Swat Valley was changing. Once a place where poets wrote verses under pine trees and children ran freely in the markets, it began to darken under the growing shadow of extremism. The Taliban crept into the region slowly at first, like a whisper, then a wind, then a storm. Their rules were simple and brutal. Girls were not to be educated. Music was banned. Women were to disappear behind walls and veils. Schools were bombed, teachers threatened, and fear seeped into the soil of Swat. And yet, every morning, Malala woke up, put on her uniform, and walked to school not in defiance, but in dignity. She was only a child, but she understood something that most adults forget. Silence is a decision, and fear is a prison. At the age of just 11, while most children her age were worrying about toys or cartoons, Malala made a different choice. She began to speak, not in the streets, but on paper. Through a BBC Urdu blog written under a pseudonym, she chronicled the terror that had invaded her world. Her words were raw, honest, and heartbreaking. "I had a terrible dream yesterday with military helicopters and the Taliban," she wrote. "I have had such dreams since the launch of the military operation in Swat." The world began to read. Her quiet, courageous protests, a nameless girl behind a pen name, was shaking the foundations of tyranny with every sentence she wrote. Her blog didn't just document fear, it challenged it. She wrote about her friends dropping out of school, about her longing for normalcy, and about the bitter taste of injustice. She used her words like others used weapons. And then, the world took notice. Journalists arrived. Cameras followed her to school. Interviews began to circulate. This soft-spoken girl from a hidden valley was becoming a symbol not just for Swat, not just for Pakistan, but for anyone who had ever been told to be quiet. The media called her brave, but bravery isn't about posing for cameras. It's about choosing to stand when your knees want to buckle. It's about knowing danger is real, and still stepping forward. And that's exactly what Malala did. Began speaking openly on Pakistani TV shows, on global platforms, and in press interviews. Her face was now known, her voice impossible to ignore. She was receiving awards and applause, but also something else, threats. The Taliban knew who she was now. They knew her name, her school, her routines. And they didn't like what they saw, a girl with a spine of steel and a mind that couldn't be chained. She was targeted, a child marked for death because she believed in something as simple and as dangerous as education. But Malala was not afraid to keep speaking, even when the threats became louder, even when her friends urged her to stop, even when her family worried, even when the world began to whisper, maybe she should stay quiet now. She wouldn't. Why? Because Malala understood something profound, something every person watching your video needs to remember. Your voice matters more when someone tries to silence it. She wasn't seeking fame, she wasn't asking for applause. She was standing up because someone had to, and if not her, then who? If not now, then when? That was her belief. That was her battle. She was not fighting men with guns, she was fighting an idea. The idea that girls don't deserve a future. The idea that learning is dangerous, the idea that some voices don't matter, and she was willing to risk everything to prove that. Wrong. In 2011, she was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize. A year later, she received Pakistan's first National Youth Peace Prize. At just 14, she had already changed more than most people change in a lifetime. But what she didn't know, what none of us knew, was that her greatest test was still to come. October 9th, 2012, it began like any other school day. Malala was riding home in a small van with her classmates, chatting, smiling, unaware of the eyes watching from the shadows. At a crossroads, the van was stopped. A man stepped inside. No name, no warning, just a question, "Who is Malala?" And then a gunshot. In that single, deafening moment, the valley went quiet. A bullet pierced her head, traveled down her neck, and shattered not only her skull but the illusion that words are harmless. The Taliban believed they had one. They believed a bullet would be enough to end a movement. They believed fear could erase a name. But what they didn't understand, what tyrants never understand, is that you can't kill an idea. You can't silence a voice once it's echoed in the hearts of millions. As Malala was rushed to a hospital in critical condition, the world held its breath. Pakistan mourned. The United Nations condemned. Vigils were held across continents. She was transferred to Birmingham, UK, unconscious, suspended between life and death. But even in that coma, the fire within her didn't go out. She had more to do, she had more to say. The bullet didn't break her, it built her. This chapter of her life, this painful, pivotal moment, wasn't an end. It was a beginning, because when Malala opened her eyes again, she didn't just survive. She rose, she stood taller, spoke louder, and became more than a girl. She became a global force. But that rise comes in the next chapter. For now, let this truth settle in your soul. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing it anyway. Malala's story isn't just hers, it's ours. It belongs to every child denied a desk, every girl denied a future, and every voice told to whisper when it was meant to roar. Because in a world that tried to quiet her, she became louder than ever. And the first spark of that fire, the beginning of everything, started right here, in a small valley, with a simple school bag, and a voice that refused to be ignored. They asked, "Who is Malala?" But the question was more than a threat, it was a challenge. And in that moment of violence, the world found its answer. The bullet was meant to end her story, but it only made it louder. While her body lay, broken and unconscious, her name was whispered across nations, printed across headlines, and carried through streets like a flag of resistance. The Taliban had tried to kill one girl, but instead, they awakened millions. They had underestimated the force of an idea, and the girl who embodied it. Malala's fight had never been about revenge, it was always about revival. A revival of hope, of rights, of education, of life itself. As she lay in critical condition in a Peshawar hospital, surgeons fought desperately to save her. The bullet had fractured her skull, pierced the thin tissue of her brain, and lodged deep near her spine. For days, the world watched in fear and prayer, and then came the decision. She was flown to Birmingham, England, for advanced care. Her life hung by a thread, but that thread was not ready to snap. She was not done. Destiny was still holding her hand. In the sterile silence of a hospital room, Malala slowly opened her eyes. No applause, no stage, just quiet breaths, blinking monitors, and the hum of machines. But in that moment, in that soft, miraculous return, the impossible began to feel possible again. She couldn't speak. Her body was weak. Half of her face was paralyzed. And yet, deep within her soul, the fire hadn't dimmed. She had not forgotten who she was. More importantly, she remembered why she had spoken out in the first place. The world waited to hear her voice again. And when it came, it wasn't loud or angry. It was steady. It was clear. It was unbroken. "I am Malala," she whispered. And with that, the pen once again challenged the gun. The pen is small, they say fragile, insignificant against tanks, bombs, and bullets. But Malala proved otherwise. She didn't fight with fists. She fought with ideas. And in that fight, she was mightier than an army. With each interview, with each article, she reminded the world that education isn't a privilege, it's a right, that books build stronger nations than bullets ever could, and that the greatest weapon against hate is knowledge. Her recovery was long and painful. Surgeries, speech therapy, rehabilitation, but her spirit moved faster than her body, and as she healed, so did the hope of millions. From refugee camps to rural villages, her story became a spark. In places where girls were hidden, her name was spoken. In homes where fear ruled, her strength became a symbol. Her voice, once local, was now global. And she did not waste that voice. She began speaking on world stages, addressing parliaments and presidents, but she never spoke from anger. She didn't speak for fame, she spoke because she remembered what it was like to be silenced. She remembered the fear of walking to school, unsure if she'd make it home. She remembered the empty seats beside her, where her friends once sat forced to drop out, forced to marry, forced to disappear. She carried their voices with her. Every sentence she spoke was an echo of those left behind, and so her pen became her weapon. Her truth became her shield. The Taliban had tried to control her narrative with violence, but she took that narrative back. She reclaimed her story, rewrote her purpose, and refused to be defined by pain. They had aimed to make her a victim. She became a victor. What made her extraordinary wasn't that she survived, it's that she chose to forgive. Even the man who shot her, she said. I don't hate the Talib who shot me, ... Even if there was a gun in my hand and he was standing in front of me, I wouldn't shoot him. That wasn't weakness. That was power. The kind of power only those with unbreakable hearts can hold. In a world obsessed with revenge, she offered grace. In a time of division, she offered unity. And where others sought war, she built peace, one word at a time. Malala's pen reminded the world that true power doesn't come from fear. It comes from truth. And truth, once spoken, has a way of spreading far beyond borders, bullets, and silence. They thought a gun would be enough to stop a girl with a notebook, but the pen won because it always does. Malala did not just survive a bullet to the head, she outlived a bulletproof system designed to suppress her existence. She emerged from death's doorstep not as a broken soul, but as a louder, clearer voice. One that now carried the weight of millions. Her presence in a hospital bed in Birmingham became more than a medical recovery. It became a metaphor for resistance, fragile, yet undefeated, bruised, yet not buried. When most people would have been consumed by trauma, Malala became a living symbol of what happens when courage becomes a habit, not just a reaction. The weeks following her surgery were grueling. Her body had to learn again what it once knew: how to speak, how to smile, how to move without pain. Half her face was paralyzed, and her hearing was damaged, but her mind remained sharp, strong, fierce. She could have faded into privacy, vanished into a quiet life, far away from the pain and pressure, and no one would have blamed her. But Malala didn't come back to hide, she came back to lead. There's a quiet kind of heroism that doesn't wear capes or stand on podiums. It exists in hospital rooms, when a teenage girl practices her first words again. It lives in the quiet defiance of picking up a book when the world told her never to read again. That kind of heroism isn't made of metal, it's made of will. And Malala's will was unshakable. That her first public speech after the attack didn't come through tears or vengeance. It came through clarity, precision, unshaken moral strength. She stood before the world and didn't beg for sympathy. She demanded justice, not just for herself, but for every girl who had been forced into silence. She didn't make the tragedy about her, she made it about us. About the millions of girls around the world still denied their basic rights. She reminded the world that the bullet wasn't just for her, it was for what she represented. And she wasn't done representing. Her story spread like wildfire. Not because it was soaked in drama, but because it was soaked in truth. Schools across America, Europe and Africa began sharing her words. Teachers printed her speeches. Parents showed their children her interviews. Malala became more than a news story. She became a mirror reflecting what bravery really looked like in the 21st century. Not brute force, not domination, but resilience rooted in empathy and purpose. In July 2013, on her 16th birthday, she walked onto a stage at the United Nations. She didn't wear armor. She wore a simple pink shawl, one that once belonged to Benazir Bhutto, Pakistan's first female prime minister, herself assassinated for speaking out. That shawl draped over Malala's shoulders like the weight of legacy, and she carried it with grace. The room fell silent. Not because of fear, but because history was about to be written, not with a gunshot, but with a voice. This is the weakest point of the terrorists, she said, that they fear women, they fear education, they fear change. And in that moment, she wasn't just a girl from Swat. She was every girl who had ever been told to sit down, shut up, and shrink into silence. She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for the 66 million girls around the world who could not. And perhaps that's what makes her story so powerful. Malala didn't ask to be the face of a movement, but when fate placed that role at her feet, she stepped into it with courage far beyond her. Yes, she used her trauma not as a crutch, but as a platform. Her pain did not harden her, it expanded her heart. Even as the threats continued, she refused to fuel hatred. She didn't call for retaliation. She called for books, for teachers, for classrooms filled with light, where the minds of children could stretch beyond borders and prejudice. What she taught us is simple but profound. True strength isn't about how loud you shout or how hard you strike. It's about how deeply you care, how long you stand, how much truth you carry when the world begs you to lie. And maybe the most powerful part of her rise was her refusal to become bitter. Even in interviews when asked about the man who shot her, Malala responded not with rage but with forgiveness. "He thought he would silence me," she said. "But instead he gave my voice more power than ever before." That is a mindset the world rarely sees. And it's the exact mindset that makes her unbreakable. The bullet may have pierced her skull, but it never touched her soul. Her scars became symbols, not of what was taken, but of what could never be. Today, when you see Malala smile, know that it's a smile carved through fire. When you hear her speak, know it's a voice that rose through blood and silence. And when you see her hold a pen, remember that it carries the weight of those who were never allowed to pick one up. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voice or the strongest punch, Malala reminds us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stay standing. Even when the world shoots you down. Malala did not come back from the edge of death to simply return to normal life. She came back to redefine it. Her recovery wasn't a pause between chapters. It was the prologue to a new era, one where a single voice, forged in fire, would now echo across parliaments, war zones, refugee camps, and boardrooms. The bullet they fired to silence her had become the drumbeat of a global movement. And Malala, once a girl with a dream in a remote valley, had become a symbol of hope for the entire world. Her mission had evolved. No longer just a student demanding her own right to education, she now stood as the defender of every child's right to learn. In 2013, she co-founded the Malala Fund, a non-profit aimed at ensuring girls everywhere from Nigeria to Afghanistan to Syria had access to 12 years of free, safe quality education. It wasn't about charity. It was about justice, about dismantling the structures that made ignorance profitable and oppression acceptable. And she did all this not from behind a wall of advisors, but from the front lines. She visited girls living in refugee camps, listened to their stories, sat in classrooms where learning was an act of rebellion, and shared their truth with the world. She wasn't speaking for them, she was amplifying them, empowering them, standing beside them, not above them. Her activism was not performance, it was partnership. Malala's journey led her to meet world leaders, presidents, and royalty, but she never lost her grounding. She still called herself a student, still spoke with humility, still carried the Swat Valley in her voice. Every handshake with a president was rooted in the same conviction she held as a little girl walking to school under threat. Education is not a privilege, it is a human right. Then came the moment that changed everything. In 2014, at just 17 years old, Malala became the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in history. She walked onto the stage in Oslo with grace beyond her years. Not to celebrate herself, but to shine the spotlight back where it belonged, on the 66 million girls still denied education. "One child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world," she said, and she proved it. The world had given her awards, titles, honors, but she never sought them. Her goal wasn't fame, it was impact, and that's why people listened. Because Malala wasn't trying to be a hero, she was simply refusing to be a bystander. And that kind of sincerity breaks through cynicism every time. Even after achieving global status, she chose to continue her own education. She enrolled at Oxford University, studying philosophy, politics, and economics, not because she needed a degree to be taken seriously, but because she believed in lifelong learning. The girl who had once written about her right to go to school, now sat in some of the world's most prestigious classrooms, not as a guest, but as a peer. Her life had come full circle, and yet her journey was just beginning. Malala's voice continues to grow, not with volume, but with reach. She has inspired documentaries, books, campaigns, and new generations of activists. And through it all, she remains a constant reminder that real change doesn't require perfection, it requires persistence. She taught us that a girl with a book is more dangerous to oppressors than a soldier with a rifle. That the pen, when wielded with truth, can shatter walls no weapon ever could. And that even when the world gives you every reason to be bitter, you can choose to lead with light. Malala didn't just change the conversation, she changed the course of global education. She made it impossible to look away. And in doing so, she left us all with a question far more important than who is Malala. She left us with this: who are we, if we stay silent? So let her story not end here. Let it begin with you. Let it spark something in your heart that refuses to be quiet. Whether you're fighting for education, justice, freedom, or truth, know that your voice matters, that your struggle is seen, that your courage is contagious. Because if Malala, with a target on her back and a bullet in her head, could rise and reshape the world, what's stopping you?